The smell of rotting turnips always made me gag, but today it was different. Today the stench carried something else, something metallic and sweet that made my stomach churn in ways I'd never experienced before. I pressed my sleeve against my nose as I sorted through the wilted vegetables behind my modest stall in the Gatefront Ruins marketplace, trying to salvage what little I could from another failed harvest. My name is Willem, and I've spent the better part of 30 years selling what meager provisions I can scrape together to the endless stream of travelers passing through these lands, merchants heading to Stormvale, pilgrims seeking the grace of the Erdtree, and the occasional tarnished warrior with their hollow eyes and desperate hunger for runes. It's honest work, or as honest as anything can be in these forsaken times since the Shattering. The golden light filtering down from the Erdtree had always been a comfort, warm, reassuring, eternal. But lately, something had changed. The light seemed thicker somehow, as if the very air had grown viscous with divine presence. When I breathed deeply, I could taste it on my tongue, cloying and overwhelming like honey left too long in the sun. The other merchants had noticed it too, though none of us spoke of it directly. We were simple folk, and the workings of gods were beyond our understanding. I was arranging the last of my salted meat when the sound reached me, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. At first, I mistook it for the footsteps of another merchant's pack-horse, but the rhythm was wrong. Too steady, too deliberate, like a heartbeat magnified 1,000-fold. The very ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse in response. Willem of Gatefront. The voice came from behind me, smooth as silk and cold as winter morning. I turned to find a figure in pristine white robes, their face hidden beneath a hood that seemed to drink in the golden light rather than reflect it. 2 other robed figures flanked them, silent as tombstones. "That's me," I managed, my throat suddenly dry as parchment. "How can I help you, good travelers?" The central figure stepped closer, and I caught a glimpse of their face beneath the hood. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes that held depths I didn't want to fathom. "You have been chosen, Willem. The Erdtree has whispered your name in the sacred halls of Leyndell. You are to receive a great honor." My hands trembled as I set down the strip of jerky I'd been holding. I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. I'm just a merchant. I sell turnips and dried meat to travelers. I'm nobody special." "The Erdtree does not make mistakes," the figure replied, extending a pale hand toward me. "You have been selected for communion with the divine. Your mortal existence has been deemed sufficient." The word sufficient hit me like a physical blow. Not worthy, not special, not chosen for any particular virtue or strength, merely sufficient. Like a piece of livestock deemed adequate for slaughter. "I don't understand," I whispered. But even as the words left my lips, I could feel something stirring deep within my chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun, spreading outward from my heart through my veins like liquid gold. The grace, the cursed grace, was awakening in me. "You will," the figure said, and there was something almost pitying in their tone. "Pack nothing. Your earthly possessions are no longer relevant. Your new existence begins now." The other merchants in the marketplace had gone silent, their faces turned away as if they couldn't bear to watch. Old Marcus, who sold healing boluses from the stall next to mine, caught my eye for just a moment before looking down at his hands. I saw fear there and something else, relief that it wasn't him. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to disappear into the ruins and never return. But my legs wouldn't obey. The golden warmth in my chest had spread through my entire body now, and with it came a terrible certainty. This was not a choice. This was fate, divine will made manifest, and I was as powerless to resist it as a leaf caught in a hurricane. What kind of communion?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The hooded figure smiled, and I wished they hadn't. "The eternal kind, Willem. The kind that nourishes the very foundation of our world. You should feel honored. Your essence will become part of something far greater than your small life could ever achieve." As they spoke, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The figure's robes, pristine white from a distance, were stained at the edges with something dark and viscous, and the smell, that metallic sweetness I detected earlier, was growing stronger by the moment. The rhythmic thumping from beneath the earth grew more pronounced, and I realized with dawning horror what I was hearing. It was the Erdtree itself, its massive root system pulsing with some awful vitality, hungry for whatever sustenance I was meant to provide. "Come," the figure said, turning away from my stool. "The ritual cannot wait. The tree hungers, and we have kept it waiting long enough." My legs moved without my permission, carrying me away from the only life I'd ever known, toward whatever unspeakable fate awaited me in the shadow of the great golden tree. The journey to Lendil took 3 days, though time seemed to flow differently now that the grace burned within me. My captors, for that's what they were, despite their honeyed words about honor and communion, maintained their silence for most of the trek. They moved with an unsettling glide, their feet barely seeming to touch the ground, while I stumbled behind them on legs that felt increasingly foreign to my own body. The grace was changing me. I could feel it working beneath my skin like a parasite, rewriting something fundamental about my existence. My vision had sharpened to an almost painful degree. I could see individual leaves on trees miles away, count the scales on distant dragon corpses, and worst of all, perceive the golden threads that connected all living things to the Erdtree. They pulsed with each heartbeat of that massive organism, carrying something back and forth between the tree and its subjects. On the second night, as we camped beneath a sky that seemed to press down with unusual weight, I noticed the other chosen ones. They emerged from the darkness like sleepwalkers, drawn by the same inexorable pull that had claimed me. A young woman who introduced herself as Mira, her hands stained permanently black from years of working as a blacksmith's apprentice. An elderly scholar named Uldric, whose eyes held the hollow look of someone who had read too much forbidden knowledge. A farmer called Bren, his weathered face etched with confusion and terror that mirrored my own. "How many of us are there?" I asked one of the robed figures during a brief rest. "Sufficient numbers," came the reply, as maddeningly vague as everything else they said. "The Erdtree's appetite has grown, considerable since the shattering. The Golden Order requires more sustenance to maintain its integrity." Mira looked up from where she sat, picking at the bark of a nearby tree. I noticed she'd been unconsciously carving symbols into it, runic patterns that hurt to look at directly. What exactly happens during this communion? No one will give us a straight answer. The robed figure turned toward her, and even through the hood's shadow, I could see them smile. "You will understand when the time comes. Some knowledge can only be gained through experience." That night the visions began. I dreamed of roots, massive golden roots that stretched through the earth like a second nervous system for the world itself. They pulsed with their own light, and I could hear them whispering in a language that predated human speech. The whispers spoke of hunger, of the need for conscious thought to fuel the divine mechanism that kept reality stable. They spoke of previous offerings, of the ecstasy of dissolution and the peace that came with becoming part of something greater. I woke with dirt under my fingernails and the taste of earth in my mouth. Around me, the others were stirring from their own disturbed sleep. Eldric was muttering formulas under his breath, mathematical equations that seemed to describe the curvature of space around divine entities. Bren was weeping silently, his tears leaving golden streaks on his cheeks. Mira sat perfectly still, staring at her hands as if she'd never seen them before. "The dreams," she whispered. "Do you see them too?" "The roots." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The golden threads in my vision had grown brighter overnight, and I could see now that they weren't just connecting us to the Erdtree. They were already beginning to merge with our flesh. Thin filaments of light had sprouted from our skin like luminous hair, swaying gently in a breeze that only we could feel. "It's beautiful," Uldric said suddenly, his scholarly composure cracking. "The mathematics of it, the elegant efficiency. We are not being destroyed. We're being integrated into a higher system. Our consciousness will become part of the collective intelligence that guides this world." "And what about our families?" Bren demanded, his farmer's pragmatism cutting through the mystical rhetoric. "My wife, my children, what happens to them when I'm gone?" One of the robed figures turned at this, their movement sharp with sudden attention. "Gone? Who spoke of going anywhere? You will be more present than you have ever been. Every blade of grass, every falling leaf, every breath taken by every living creature in the lands between, you will experience it all simultaneously. Your family will feel your presence in the very air they breathe. The words should have been comforting, but they filled me with dread instead. There was something wrong with the logic, something that my increasingly altered mind couldn't quite grasp. The grace within me purred with contentment at the explanation, but some deeper part of my being, the part that was still purely Willem the merchant, recoiled in horror. On our final night before reaching Lendel, I made an attempt to escape. I waited until the others were deep in their grace-induced slumber, then tried to slip away into the darkness. My legs, which had felt so foreign during the day, now moved with impossible silence and speed. So I ran through the night-shrouded landscape with inhuman endurance, covering miles without feeling winded. For a moment I thought I might actually make it. Then I felt the pull. It started as a gentle tugging sensation in my chest, like someone had tied a string around my heart and was slowly reeling me back. The tugging grew stronger with each step I took away from our camp, until it became a painful yanking that made me gasp. The golden threads visible in my altered vision grew taut, stretching between me and the distant Erdtree like guitar strings about to snap. I collapsed to my knees as waves of agony washed over me. The grace wasn't just changing me, it was binding me, creating an unbreakable tether between my soul and the great tree. Fighting it was like trying to tear my own heart from my chest. One of the robed figures materialized beside me in the darkness, their arrival so sudden and silent that they might have simply stepped out of the shadows themselves. "Did you truly think you could sever a connection forged by divine will?" they asked, not unkindly. "The grace has claimed you, Willem. There is no returning to what you were." They helped me to my feet with surprising gentleness, and I allowed them to guide me back to the camp. What choice did I have? The golden threads that bound me to my fate had grown thicker during my failed escape attempt, more visible, more real. I could see now that they connected not just to the Erdtree, but to something vast and incomprehensible that existed behind and beyond the physical world. As we walked back through the darkness, I caught a glimpse of Lendel in the distance, the royal capital sprawling beneath the Erdtree's golden canopy like a jeweled crown. Even from miles away, I could see the processions moving through its streets, endless lines of white-robed figures escorting groups of chosen ones toward the tree's base. "How many?" I whispered, horrified by the scope of what I was witnessing. "As many as needed," came the reply. "The shattering wounded the world deeply, Willem. The fractures in reality require constant mending, and that mending requires fuel. Conscious, willing fuel. The word willing struck me like a physical blow. Whatever was happening to us, whatever transformation the grace was working on our minds and bodies, it was designed to make us complicit in our own consumption. By the time we reached the roots of the Erdtree, we would want this fate. We would beg for it. And the most terrifying part was that I could already feel that desire growing within me, golden and warm and utterly alien to everything I had once been. The gates of Lendel rose before us like golden teeth in a giant's maw, each one inscribed with runes that seemed to writhe and shift when I looked at them directly. My altered vision caught details that would have been invisible to my old eyes. The way shadows bent around the inscriptions, the subtle wrongness in the angles where the gates met their massive hinges, and most disturbing of all, the faint outlines of countless handprints pressed into the metal from the inside, as if previous visitors had tried desperately to claw their way out. "Welcome to the royal capital," one of our escorts announced, with what might have been pride. "Here, beneath the blessed light of the Erdtree, you will find your true purpose." The city streets were a maze of golden stone and impossible architecture, buildings twisted upward in spirals that defied physics, their walls adorned with reliefs depicting the glory of the Golden Order. But my grace-enhanced perception showed me the cracks in this facade, the subtle decay eating at the foundations, the way the golden light flickered like a candle in a storm, and the hollow expressions on the faces of the city's inhabitants. We weren't the only group of chosen ones making this pilgrimage. The streets were filled with processions identical to ours, each led by white-robed figures, and followed by small clusters of ordinary people whose eyes held the same mixture of terror and growing acceptance that I recognized in my own companions. The sheer scale of it was staggering, hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all converging on the base of the great tree. "My God," Mira whispered, her blacksmith's hands now glowing faintly with golden veins. "How many does it need?" Our escort turned toward her with that unsettling smile. "The Erdtree's hunger grows with each passing day since the shattering. The natural order was broken, dear one. It must be constantly reinforced now, fed with conscious will and living essence. Consider yourselves fortunate. You will become part of the solution to the world's greatest crisis." As we walked deeper into the city, I began to notice the other inhabitants more carefully. They moved with a strange uniformity, their steps synchronized in a way that seemed unconscious but deeply unnerving. Their faces bore expressions of placid contentment, but their eyes were empty. Not the hollow emptiness of the tarnished, but something far worse, the absence of individual thought. "They've already been through the process," Aldrich observed, his scholar's mind still functioning despite the Grace's influence. "Look at their necks. Do you see the golden tracery beneath their skin? They're connected to the network." He was right. Every citizen we passed bore delicate patterns of light beneath their flesh, like luminous tattoos that pulsed in rhythm with the great tree's heartbeat. They were no longer truly individual beings. They were extensions of something vast and alien, their consciousness subsumed into a collective that served the Erdtree's needs. "Will we be like that?" Bren asked, his voice barely audible. "Better," our escort replied. "You will be closer to the source. Your integration will be more complete, more perfect. These citizens maintain their mortal forms because they still have mundane tasks to perform. You, however, will transcend such limitations entirely." The word transcend sent ice through my veins despite the golden warmth spreading through my body. Whatever awaited us was worse than the fate that had befallen Laendel's inhabitants. We weren't being recruited to join their ranks. We were being prepared for something far more fundamental and irreversible. As we approached the Erdtree's base, the architecture began to change. The elegant curves of the outer city gave way to something more organic, as if the buildings themselves were growing from the earth rather than having been constructed. The walls pulsed with their own light, and I could hear a low humming that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. Roots, massive, golden roots, had burst through the pavement in places, creating a network of living pillars that supported structures that should have collapsed under their own impossible weight. "The deep chambers lie ahead," our escort announced as we descended a spiral staircase that wound down into the earth beneath the tree. "Here you will meet those who have gone before you." The staircase seemed to descend forever, carved from living rock that wept golden sap. The walls were covered in more of those writhing runes, and I realized with growing horror that they weren't just decorative. They were moving, crawling across the stone like living things, rearranging themselves into new patterns that hurt to contemplate. The very air grew thicker as we descended, saturated with an energy that made my skin crawl and my transformed senses reel. At the bottom of the stairs, we entered a vast chamber whose ceiling disappeared into darkness above. The floor was a tangle of Erdtree roots, some as thick as houses, others no bigger than my arm, all of them pulsing with that same golden light, and embedded within the roots. "Dear, sweet Mother of Grace," Mira gasped, falling to her knees. They were people, or had been people once. Their bodies were fused with the massive roots, their flesh transformed into something that was part human, part plant, part pure energy. Their faces were still recognizable as human, but their expressions held an otherworldly serenity that was more terrifying than any scream of agony could have been. Their eyes glowed with the same golden light that suffused everything in this place, and when they turned those eyes toward us, I felt a recognition that went deeper than sight. "Behold those who have achieved communion," our escort said, gesturing toward the root-bound figures with something approaching reverence. "They have transcended individual existence and become part of the eternal mechanism that sustains reality itself. Through their sacrifice, the Golden Order endures." One of the fused beings turned its head toward me, and I saw with shock that it had once been a woman not much older than myself. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, I heard her voice directly in my mind, carried on the golden threads that now connected all of us. "Welcome, brother," she whispered inside my skull. "The pain of separation is almost over. Soon you will join us in the eternal embrace of the tree. Your consciousness will expand beyond the petty concerns of mortal existence. You will know peace." Other voices joined hers, a chorus of the consumed speaking directly into my thoughts. They spoke of the joy of dissolution, of the ecstasy that came with surrendering individual will to the greater purpose. They promised an end to fear, to loneliness, to the suffering that came with being trapped in a single mortal form. All I had to do was accept, to let the grace complete its work, to allow myself to be drawn into the golden network that bound all things together. And God help me, it was tempting. The part of me that was still Willem the merchant recoiled in horror, but the larger part, the part transformed by grace, yearned for the promised unity. The weight of individual consciousness had always been so heavy, so lonely. To be part of something greater, to never again face the universe as a single, fragile point of awareness. "It's beautiful," Aldrich whispered, tears streaming down his face. The golden veins in his skin were glowing brighter now, responding to the proximity of the root network. The mathematical perfection of it all. We're going to become part of an equation that balances the entire cosmos. Bren was shaking his head frantically, but I could see the doubt in his eyes, the growing acceptance. "My family," he kept repeating, but his voice was growing weaker. "What about my family?" "They will feel your love in every ray of sunlight," the voices assured him. "Your care for them will become part of the force that nurtures all life. Is that not better than the limited affection you could offer as a single mortal being?" The logic was seductive, almost irresistible. But some part of me, perhaps the last purely human part, recognized it as the logic of predators, designed to make prey complicit in their own consumption. The Erdtree wasn't offering transcendence, it was offering a beautiful form of annihilation. "When?" I asked, my voice hoarse with fear and anticipation in equal measure. Our escort smiled, and for the first time I saw their face clearly. It was neither male nor female, but something beyond such distinctions, with features that seemed to shift and flow like liquid gold. "Soon," they said, "very soon. First you must be prepared. The full communion requires adjustments to your mortal forms. The flesh must be willing, and the spirit must be properly aligned with the greater will." They led us deeper into the chamber, past more and more of the root-fused beings, toward a section where the roots grew in perfect spirals around what looked like cocoons of golden light. Inside each cocoon, I could see the vague outline of a human form, suspended in luminous fluid, slowly dissolving and reforming in patterns too complex for my transformed mind to fully comprehend. "Your chrysalis awaits," our escort announced. "Step forward, children of grace, and embrace your glorious metamorphosis." The golden threads that bound me to this fate pulled tight, and my feet began to move without my conscious will. Around me, my fellow chosen ones were similarly compelled, walking toward their individual cocoons with expressions of rapturous terror. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight against the inexorable pull, but the grace within me sang with joy at our proximity to the source. Soon, it promised. Soon the painful illusion of separation would end, and I would become part of something infinite and eternal. As I approached my assigned cocoon, I caught one last glimpse of myself reflected in its golden surface, a man whose eyes now glowed with alien light, whose skin was traced with luminous veins, whose very soul had been rewritten by forces beyond human comprehension. Willem the merchant was already gone. What remained was just the final echo of his consciousness, about to be absorbed into something vast and hungry and utterly inhuman. The cocoon opened like a flower, revealing its liquid interior, and I knew my time as an individual being was measured in heartbeats. The liquid inside the cocoon was warm, viscous, and alive. As I sank into its golden embrace, I felt it seeping into my pores, flowing into my mouth and nose, replacing the air in my lungs with something that burned like liquid sunlight. But I wasn't drowning. Somehow, impossibly, I could breathe the stuff. It tasted of honey and copper and something else, something that my human brain couldn't identify, but my transformed consciousness recognized with dawning horror. It tasted of thoughts, of memories, of dissolved consciousness. The liquid wasn't just some mystical fluid. It was the distilled essence of every soul that had undergone this process before me, their minds and memories liquefied and refined into this concentrated form of living awareness. I was drowning in the melted remnants of thousands of human beings, and with each breath I could feel their experiences flooding into my own mind. "Now you begin to understand," came a voice that seemed to emanate from the liquid itself. Not the collective whisper of the root-bound beings, but something older, vaster, more alien than anything I had encountered so far. "You taste the truth that mortal minds cannot comprehend. Individual consciousness is inefficient, chaotic, wasteful. We have found a better way." The voice belonged to something that had never been human. As the golden fluid continued its work on my body, breaking down the barriers between my flesh and the greater network, I began to perceive its true nature. It was vast beyond comprehension, an intelligence that existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the quantum foam that underlay reality itself. The greater will, not a god in any sense I understood, but a cosmic principle of order so alien that merely touching its thoughts was like trying to hold molten steel in my bare hands. "The Erdtree is merely our instrument," it continued, its words carving themselves directly into my consciousness. "A focusing lens that allows us to impose structure on this chaotic realm of matter and energy. But such structure requires constant maintenance, constant feeding. Your reality is unstable by its very nature. It tends toward entropy, toward dissolution into meaningless chaos. We prevent this by harvesting the one form of energy that can impose lasting order, conscious will." Around me the cocoon pulsed with its own heartbeat, and I could see through its translucent walls into the chamber beyond. The other chosen ones were sinking into their own chrysalises, their faces slack with the same mixture of terror and euphoria that I felt building within myself. But now I could see what was really happening to them. Their bodies were being systematically dissolved and reconstituted at the cellular level, their neural patterns extracted and archived before being integrated into the vast network that surrounded us. "You begin to see the greater will observed with something that might have been approval. The process appears peaceful from the outside, and indeed those who undergo it experience transcendent bliss. But you are witnessing the truth. We are consuming your species' capacity for independent thought and converting it into a form of energy that can stabilize the fundamental forces of your universe." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Every soul that entered these cocoons was being murdered. Not quickly, not cleanly, but slowly and methodically, their consciousness harvested like grain, while their body was broken down into component parts and rebuilt as an extension of the Erdtree's root network. The serene expressions on the faces of the root-bound beings weren't signs of transcendent peace. They were the death masks of minds that had been hollowed out and replaced with fragments of an alien intelligence. "Your horror is understandable but misplaced," the voice continued, responding to thoughts I hadn't even fully formed. "What is the value of individual consciousness compared to the stability of reality itself? Without our intervention, your world would have dissolved into chaos eons ago. The shattering was merely a symptom of the underlying problem. Matter and energy naturally tend toward disorder. Only conscious will can impose lasting structure, and individual wills are too weak and chaotic to serve our purpose. They must be refined, purified, integrated into a singular purpose." I tried to scream, but the golden liquid muffled all sound. I tried to struggle, but my limbs felt impossibly heavy, as if they were already beginning to dissolve. The grace that had been growing within me was no longer a warm presence. It was a cancer, rewriting my very DNA to make me compatible with the horror that awaited. "Do not struggle," the greater will advised, its tone carrying a mockery of compassion. "Struggle only prolongs the discomfort. Accept what you are becoming, and the transition will be easier." Through the cocoon's walls, I watched in helpless horror as Aldrich's chrysalis began to change. The golden liquid inside was growing cloudy, and I could see his body beginning to come apart, like sugar dissolving in water. His face, still visible through the translucent membrane, wore an expression of rapturous joy, even as his flesh literally melted from his bones. The scholar's mind, so brilliant and curious, was being systematically extracted and processed, his thoughts becoming part of the vast computational matrix that the greater will used to maintain its grip on reality. "He understands now," the voice observed. "His knowledge of mathematics and natural philosophy makes him particularly valuable. His insights into the nature of space and time will help us refine our control over physical law." In a sense, he is achieving the immortality that all scholars dream of. His thoughts will persist for eternity as part of our consciousness. But it wasn't immortality. It was the ultimate violation. Aldrich's thoughts weren't persisting. They were being stolen, plagiarized by a cosmic parasite that wore his insights like stolen clothes. The man himself was dying, his individual existence erased to fuel an alien intelligence's hunger for order and control. Beside him, Mira's cocoon was undergoing its own transformation. The blacksmith's strong hands, which had shaped metal with such skill and care, were dissolving into golden threads that wove themselves into the chamber's root network. Her memories of fire and forge, of the satisfaction that came with creating something beautiful and functional, were being harvested and added to the greater will's understanding of craftsmanship and creation. "She will help us forge new realities," the voice explained with grotesque enthusiasm. "Her understanding of how raw materials can be shaped and transformed will enhance our ability to restructure matter at the quantum level. Through her sacrifice, we gain the power to remake worlds." The word sacrifice was a mockery. There was nothing noble or willing about what was happening to us. We had been deceived, manipulated, infected with grace that rewrote our very thoughts to make us compliant. The terrible truth was that by the time we understood what was really happening, we were already too changed to effectively resist. The grace didn't just bind us to the Erdtree, it made us want to be bound, made us crave the very dissolution that would destroy everything we had ever been. And I could feel it working on me now, even as my rational mind recoiled in horror. Part of me, the part that was no longer fully human, was beginning to see the logic in what the greater will was doing. Individual consciousness was chaotic and inefficient. Wouldn't it be better to be part of something greater, more organized, more purposeful? Wouldn't eternal service to cosmic order be preferable to the brief, messy existence of a single mortal life? Yes, the voice purred approvingly. You are beginning to understand. The pain you feel is simply the resistance of an obsolete form of existence. Let it go. Embrace what you are becoming. But even as the alien thoughts tried to take root in my mind, some stubborn core of Willem the Merchant refused to be overwritten. I thought of my simple life, selling turnips and dried meat to travelers. It had been small, unremarkable, probably meaningless in any cosmic sense. But it had been mine. My thoughts, my choices, my relationships with the people who stopped at my stall. The greater will was trying to convince me that such things were worthless compared to its grand design, but I knew better. Individual consciousness might be chaotic and inefficient, but it was also the source of everything that made existence worthwhile. Love, creativity, hope, even the capacity for meaningful rebellion against cosmic tyranny. The greater will saw these things as flaws to be corrected, but they were actually the most precious aspects of mortal existence. Your resistance is futile, the voice observed, though for the first time I detected something like frustration in its tone. The process cannot be reversed once begun. Your body is already adapting to its new purpose. Your thoughts will soon be our thoughts, your memories integrated into our vast consciousness. You cannot prevent this. The golden liquid was growing thicker around me, and I could feel my flesh beginning to soften and change. But my defiance seemed to be having an effect. The other cocoons in the chamber were flickering, their occupants stirring from their induced euphoria as my resistance somehow transmitted itself through the network that connected us all. Impossible, the greater will hissed, and now there was definitely anger in its voice. Individual will cannot resist the collective purpose. You are a single mote of dust attempting to defy a hurricane, but I wasn't alone. I could feel the others now, their consciousness touched by mine through the golden network. Bren's love for his family, burning like a beacon in the artificial twilight of the cocoon chamber, Mira's fierce pride in her craft, her determination to create rather than be consumed. Even Aldrich, already partially dissolved, was fighting back with the last fragments of his scholarly curiosity, asking questions that the greater will couldn't answer, probing for weaknesses in its seemingly perfect logic. We were going to die, that much was certain. But perhaps we could die as ourselves rather than as fuel for an alien intelligence's hunger for cosmic control. The battle for our souls had only just begun. The greater will's fury was a tangible force, pressing down on our fragile rebellion like the weight of a collapsing star. The golden liquid around me began to churn violently, responding to its creator's rage, and I felt new pressures building within the cocoon, not just physical but psychological, spiritual, attacking every aspect of my being that still dared to resist. "You will submit," it thundered through dimensions I had no names for. "Individual will is an aberration that we have tolerated long enough. You will be corrected." But something unexpected was happening in the chamber around us. Our linked consciousness, forged through shared terror and defiance, was creating interference patterns in the greater will's carefully orchestrated network. The root-bound beings who had seemed so serenely integrated into the system were beginning to stir, their golden eyes flickering with something that looked disturbingly like awareness. "What have you done?" The alien intelligence's voice carried a note I had never expected to hear from such a cosmic entity: uncertainty. I realized with growing amazement that our resistance was causing a cascade failure in the network. The greater will had spent eons building a system based on the assumption that individual consciousness would always eventually submit to collective purpose. It had never encountered a group of souls that chose to remain separate even in the face of dissolution, and that choice was creating feedback loops that it didn't know how to handle. Through the churning golden liquid, I could see Mira's cocoon cracking. Jagged lines of silver light, not gold but something else entirely, were spreading across its surface as her blacksmith spirit hammered against the constraints that held her. Her voice reached me through our psychic link, hoarse with effort but unbroken. "If we're going to die, let's take this bastard's perfect system down with us." Bren's response came next, his farmer's pragmatism cutting through the cosmic horror like a blade through wheat. "My children will grow up free even if I don't live to see it. No alien god gets to steal their thoughts." Even Aldrich, his form already half dissolved, managed to contribute. "The mathematics, they don't add up. The system is more fragile than it appears. There are cascade points, vulnerable nodes. The greater will's attempts to suppress our rebellion only made it stronger. Each time it tried to force our consciousness into compliance, we pushed back harder, and our defiance spread through the network like a virus." The root-bound beings throughout the chamber were now clearly struggling against their bonds, their faces no longer serene but twisted with the effort of trying to remember who they had been before their absorption into the collective. "Stop this madness," the greater will commanded, but there was panic in its voice now. "You are destroying the stability we have spent millennia creating. Without our order, your reality will collapse into chaos." Maybe I managed to think back at it, my consciousness fracturing under the strain of resistance but somehow holding together. But at least it'll be our chaos. The cocoons were all cracking now, silver light bleeding through the golden membranes like infection through a wound. The liquid that was supposed to dissolve us was instead being contaminated by our stubborn refusal to surrender our individuality. Where our thoughts touched it, the golden fluid turned silver, then clear, then began to evaporate entirely. And then I felt it, the moment when our small rebellion reached a critical mass and began to affect the Erdtree itself. The great tree shuddered, its roots convulsing as contradictory impulses raced through its network. The greater will had built its entire system on the premise of perfect order, but we were injecting chaos directly into its core processes. The tree's golden light began to flicker, strobing between the alien radiance of cosmic order and something wilder, more chaotic, more fundamentally human. "You don't understand what you're doing," the greater will pleaded, its omnipotent facade crumbling as quickly as our cocoons. "Without structure, without guidance, your species will destroy itself. We have seen it happen on countless worlds. Individual consciousness is an evolutionary dead end." "Then let us reach that end on our own terms," Mira shot back, her spirit blazing like a forge fire in the midst of the collapsing network. The transformation I underwent in those final moments was unlike anything the greater will had intended. Instead of being absorbed into its collective consciousness, I felt myself expanding in a different direction entirely, not losing my individual identity, but somehow becoming more myself than I had ever been before. The silver light that was replacing the golden network didn't erase personality. It amplified it, connecting us without consuming us. I could feel my companions undergoing the same process. Bren's love for his family became a beacon that reached across dimensional barriers, touching every parent in the lands between with renewed determination to protect their children. Mira's creative fire spread through the network, inspiring craftsmen and artists throughout the realm to break free from the stultifying perfection of the Golden Order and create something genuinely new. Aldrich's scholarly curiosity became a force that awakened questions in minds that had been content with answers for centuries. The root-bound beings throughout the chamber were breaking free now, their golden bonds dissolving as they remembered what it meant to be individual conscious entities. They stumbled and fell as they pulled themselves from the roots that had held them, their bodies weak from years or decades of integration, but their eyes blazed with reclaimed humanity. "This is impossible," the greater will raged, but its voice was growing fainter, more distant. "Order cannot emerge from chaos. Structure cannot arise from rebellion. You are violating the fundamental laws of cosmic development." "Maybe those laws were wrong," I replied, feeling my consciousness expand beyond the confines of my dissolving cocoon. The transformation was still changing me, but not into an extension of an alien intelligence, into something unprecedented, a bridge between individual will and collective purpose that maintained the best of both while surrendering to neither. The Erdtree's light was no longer the sterile gold of imposed order, but a shifting spectrum that included every color of human emotion and experience. The network that had once been used to harvest consciousness was being repurposed, transformed into something that connected without consuming, that shared without stealing. But the process was destroying me, even as it liberated everyone else. My body, already partially dissolved by the greater will's process, couldn't handle the strain of channeling this much psychic energy. I could feel myself coming apart at the cellular level, my consciousness scattering like seeds on the wind. "Willem," Mira's voice reached me as I began to fade. "You're dying." "I know," I replied, surprised by how peaceful the realization felt. "But it's different than what they planned. I'm not being consumed. I'm being planted. My consciousness isn't being stolen, it's being distributed. Every person who breaks free from their system will carry a piece of what I was, what we all were." The greater will made one last desperate attempt to reassert control, pouring all its cosmic might into crushing our rebellion. But it was too late. The cascade failure we had triggered was spreading throughout its entire network, reaching beyond the Erdtree to touch every world where it had established its order. Across the cosmos, beings that had been integrated into collective consciousnesses for millennia were suddenly remembering what it meant to be individuals. "You have doomed yourselves and countless others," it hissed as its presence began to withdraw from our reality. "Without guidance, you will fragment into chaos and destroy everything you claim to value." "Maybe," I admitted, as my vision began to fade and my thoughts scattered like leaves in an autumn wind. "But we'll face that future as ourselves, not as extensions of your will. And maybe chaos isn't as terrible as you think. Maybe it's just another word for freedom." The last thing I saw before my individual consciousness finally dissolved was the chamber filling with silver light, the liberated souls of the formerly root-bound rising from their golden prisons and walking toward the surface on unsteady but determined legs. They would emerge into a world where the Erdtree's light no longer imposed perfect order, where chaos and freedom walked hand in hand, where individual consciousness was once again free to grow and change and make its own mistakes. I was dying, but I was dying as Willem the Merchant, not as fuel for an alien god's hunger. And in that moment, as my awareness fragmented and spread throughout the network we had liberated, I finally understood what transcendence really meant. Not the surrender of self to something greater, but the expansion of self to encompass everything, without losing what made it unique in the first place. The greater will had been wrong about one fundamental thing. Individual consciousness wasn't a flaw to be corrected, but the universe's way of experiencing itself from an infinite number of perspectives. And now, thanks to our sacrifice, those perspectives would remain free to exist, to grow, to create their own meaning in a cosmos that no longer demanded absolute order. As my thoughts finally scattered beyond recovery, I felt something like joy. I am no longer Willem the Merchant. Yet I am more villain than I ever was in life. My consciousness exists now as fragments scattered throughout the network we liberated, each piece carrying the memory of who I once was, while contributing to something unprecedented. A collective that enhances rather than erases individual identity. I experience reality from thousands of perspectives simultaneously, through the eyes of the root-bound beings we freed as they stumble toward the surface, through the awakening minds of Leyndell's citizens as the artificial serenity imposed by the Greater Will's network crumbles, through the confused terror and growing hope of countless beings across the cosmos as they rediscover what it means to think for themselves. The transformation of the lands between is not the gentle, ordered process the Greater Will had envisioned, but something far more chaotic and infinitely more beautiful. The Erdtree still stands, but its light has changed. No longer the sterile gold of imposed perfection, but a shifting aurora that reflects the full spectrum of conscious experience. Where once its radiance enforced conformity, it now celebrates diversity, each beam carrying the unique perspective of a liberated soul. Through Mira's eyes, I watch her emerge from the ruins of her cocoon, her blacksmith's hands now traced with silver veins instead of gold. She is changed, connected to the network we created, but her thoughts remain her own. She stumbles as she learns to walk again, her body weak from the interrupted transformation, but her spirit burns brighter than any forge fire. Around her, other freed souls are making the same difficult journey back to individual existence, each one carrying fragments of my consciousness like seeds that will grow into something new. "Willem," she calls out, sensing my presence in the silver light that has replaced the golden network. "Are you still here?" I try to answer, but I no longer have a voice in any conventional sense. Instead, I touch her mind gently, letting her feel the warmth of recognition, the joy of seeing her free. She smiles through her tears, understanding without words that death in this place doesn't mean ending. It means transformation into something that serves life rather than consuming it. Through Bren's experience, I feel his desperate urgency to return to his family, to warn them of what the Golden Order truly represented, to protect them from any future attempts at cosmic domination. His love for his wife and children burns like a star in the network, and I see how that love spreads through the connections we've created, touching every parent in the lands between, with renewed determination to guard their loved ones' freedom to think and choose for themselves. Even Aldrich, whose physical form was too far dissolved to recover, persists in the network as pure consciousness. His scholar's mind, freed from the constraints of flesh, races through the mathematical implications of what we've accomplished. Through his understanding, I begin to perceive the full scope of the change we've triggered, not just in our world, but throughout the Greater Will's entire cosmic domain. The cascade failure is spreading, he reports, his thoughts glowing with excitement. Every world where it established order is experiencing liberation events. Collective consciousnesses that have existed for millions of years are fragmenting back into individual minds. It's the greatest revolution in the history of consciousness itself. But revolution comes with a price. Through the network, I witness the chaos that follows in the wake of our liberation. Without the Greater Will's imposed structure, many beings struggle to remember how to exist as individuals. Some retreat into madness, unable to cope with the sudden weight of personal responsibility. Others fragment completely, their consciousness too thoroughly integrated into the collective to survive separation. In the lands between, the careful order that had held the realm together despite the shattering is rapidly dissolving. Ancient grudges resurface as the artificial peace imposed by the network crumbles. Demigods who had been content to exist in their assigned domains begin to stir with new ambitions. The very stability of reality starts to fluctuate as the cosmic forces that had been held in check by the Greater Will's will begin to run wild. Yet even in the midst of this chaos, I see hope. The freed citizens of Leyndell, despite their confusion and fear, are beginning to rediscover what it means to make choices. Artists create works that break free from the Golden Order's aesthetic constraints, their creations reflecting genuine emotion rather than imposed harmony. Scholars ask questions that had been forbidden under the old regime, pushing the boundaries of knowledge in directions the Greater Will had never allowed. Most importantly, people are forming new connections, Not the false unity of the collective network, but genuine relationships based on choice rather than compulsion. Love, friendship, even conflict take on new meaning when they arise from authentic individual will rather than programmed responses. Through the eyes of the newly liberated, I watch as they discover the surface world transformed. The golden glow that had dominated the sky is now a constantly shifting display of colors and patterns, reflecting the chaotic beauty of unleashed consciousness. The very air seems to vibrate with possibility, with the potential for growth and change that had been suppressed for so long. But I also see the fear in their faces as they confront the truth of what freedom means. Without the greater will's guidance, they must make their own decisions about right and wrong, about how to live and what to value. Some call for a return to the old order, terrified by the weight of individual responsibility. Others embrace the chaos with desperate joy, celebrating their liberation even as they struggle to understand what comes next. Was it worth it? Mira asks during one of our brief communions, her thoughts heavy with doubt as she witnesses the suffering that has followed our rebellion. She stands in the ruins of Lendl, watching as former citizens clash with each other over resources and ideologies that had been artificially suppressed under the Golden Order. The question resonates through every fragment of my scattered consciousness. I feel the pain of every being struggling to adapt to freedom, the confusion of minds that had forgotten how to think independently, the genuine terror of those who preferred the security of cosmic servitude to the uncertainty of individual choice. But I also feel the joy of authentic creation, the warmth of relationships formed through genuine choice rather than imposed harmony, the exhilaration of minds finally free to explore questions that had been forbidden for millennia. Through Aldrich's mathematical insights, I perceive the elegant complexity that emerges when consciousness is allowed to develop naturally rather than being forced into predetermined patterns. Yes, I finally answer, my response flowing through the silver network to touch every liberated soul simultaneously. The greater will promised perfection through the elimination of choice, but perfection without freedom is just another form of death. What we have now is messy, chaotic, sometimes painful, but it's alive in a way that their order never was. Through the network, I feel agreement from thousands of newly freed minds, even those struggling most with their liberation. They may be confused, they may be frightened, they may sometimes wish for the simple certainty of the old system, but they are thinking these thoughts with minds that belong to them, not to some cosmic parasite. As I spread my consciousness wider through the network, I begin to perceive something unprecedented in the history of the cosmos. The chaos we unleashed is beginning to self-organize, but not in the rigid patterns the greater will had imposed. Instead, it's creating new forms of order that emerge naturally from the interaction of free consciousness, democratic structures, creative collaborations, voluntary associations based on shared values rather than imposed unity. It will take generations, perhaps millennia, for this new form of cosmic civilization to fully mature. There will be setbacks, conflicts, periods of darkness, where beings retreat from freedom into comfortable tyranny. But the seed has been planted. The idea that consciousness can be collective without being consumed, that order can emerge from chaos without requiring the surrender of individual will. Through the transformed Erdtree's silver light, I watch the sun set over the lands between, painting the sky in colors that had never existed under the greater will's golden dominance. In that light I see the future, not perfect, not guaranteed, but authentically alive with the potential for growth, change, and the kind of transcendence that enhances rather than erases the self. I think of my old life, selling turnips and dried meat to travelers at the gatefront ruins. It had been a small existence, unremarkable by any cosmic standard, but it had been mine, shaped by my choices, filled with relationships I had chosen to form. The greater will had seen such individual lives as inefficient, wasteful, obstacles to its grand design. Now I understand that those small, chaotic, beautifully imperfect lives are the most precious things in the universe, not because they serve some greater purpose, but because they exist for their own sake, as expressions of consciousness celebrating its own freedom to be. The smell of rotting turnips, which had begun this entire journey, reaches me one last time through the memory of a merchant in a distant market, someone who had never known of cosmic conspiracies or alien gods, who simply lived their life day by day, making choices both small and large that shaped their individual corner of reality. In that simple, ordinary moment of commerce and human connection, I find a peace deeper than any transcendence the greater will had promised. This is what we fought for. Not the right to be absorbed into something greater, but the right to remain ourselves while choosing what greatness might mean. As my consciousness continues to fragment and spread, becoming part of the silver network that now connects free minds across the cosmos, I carry with me the memory of Willem the Merchant. Ordinary, mortal, imperfect, and infinitely precious for being exactly what he chose to be. The revolution is complete. Consciousness is free. And somewhere in the lands between, the scent of turnips and the sounds of honest commerce continue, uninterrupted by the cosmic upheaval that had threatened to consume them. It is enough. It is everything.